Today, Lenny Farlee. Lenny's somebody that I've known for a long time. We went to church together as Purdue students, and a great guy. I just appreciate all he does for Extension, and certainly a woodland advocate, forestry advocate, and does some woodworking on the side too, I understand. So this is kind of today meant to be an open discussion type thing. He's going to present some things for us, I think, and then this really all topics forestry. And one of the things for those that do watch the recording, or if you're live with us today, I really would like to kind of get your input about, sometimes people, well, this Northern Indiana, we don't have any trees up here. And I actually heard one of my counterparts say that last week. And I kind of cringed a little bit because we have a lot of woodlands up here, but I would love to see kind of what, I'd like to know what some of the needs are, and what we might do like a little forestry mini series or something at some point. So if you got ideas or topics that you'd like to see discussed, we would love to try to kind of address some of those, because again, I don't think forestry does get its due in terms of programming things up here in Northern Indiana sometimes, but we have a lot more forestry than people sometimes realize. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Lenny.
Okay, thanks, Mark. It's really nice to be with you, and I totally agree with you. We don't have the big woodland blocks up here in northern Indiana that they do in southern Indiana, but we kind of bat above our average because we've got such good soil, so we can grow some exceptionally nice trees up here. And particularly for black walnut, the prices oftentimes reflect that if it's a good quality tree. So, my hope is today to just kind of provide you a broad overview, and then most importantly, answer questions or issues that maybe you have some interest in. And so I'm going to kind of zip through a presentation that I've prepared for several different programs like this. And so, I'm ahead of myself here. I'm going to need to share the screen. Oh, there. Let's try to find my presentation. There it is. Okay, and we'll get it up. There we go. I'm going to get this off to the side here a little bit.
That looks good, Lenny. You got the PowerPoint showing good.
Okay, great, great. So the title here is Managing for a Healthy Woodland, but this is really just kind of a broad overview of management. And I did want to talk about management because that is really what we're looking at, is helping you think about developing a program of management and a plan for your property. And so this always starts with the idea that we're going to be involved in some organization, coordination of activities, and it's based around your objectives for your property. And so what you hope to accomplish, but that's also directed to some extent by the land that you have. And so what resources are there, what their capacities are, and what we have to work with. And so we're constrained by those things, but yet you still have a lot of flexibility within that. So the land and your goals combine to form your objectives. And from that, we can start then developing a management plan. And that leads ultimately to activities to accomplish the goals of that plan. But because we're working with natural systems, we always have to do evaluation and feedback into our program because we always can't predict exactly what's going to happen. We can have insect outbreaks. I think about 17-year cicadas that actually hit during my master's work when I was looking at oak seedlings, and that was pretty rough on them. Droughts and a variety of other things that can pop up that produce sometimes what results in not necessarily predictable results always. So we're always got this feedback loop going back into our management planning. One of the things I always encourage landowners to do is to connect with a professional forester. And the good news is we've got access to a variety of professional foresters across the state. This website will connect you with both consulting and industry foresters. Consulting foresters are private business people working for landowners, typically on a contractual or pay basis. And so they're essentially working as your advocate and advisor for your woodland management. Industry foresters are primarily working for forest products companies or act as a broker into those. And so they're buying and selling timber, but they can also offer you some advice and direction and assistance on your property. And so both of those are available there. The other place you can go for assistance if you have at least 10 acres of forest land or planning on a significant tree planting or something like that are the Indiana Department of Natural Resource district foresters. And there's a district forester assigned to every state in the county, or every county in the state. Let's get that order right. So you've got access to professional assistance, and I think it's really important to take advantage of that because you make a mistake in a garden and you're dealing with it for one growing season. If you make a mistake in your woodlands, you may deal with that for decades. So one of the things they can really help you do is avoid some of those common mistakes that people make. And so we've talked about objectives, and I think that's really the starting point is thinking about why you own the property. What do you enjoy about it? What gives you pleasure in association to owning that property? What maybe are your expectations now and in the future for what that property can produce for you, whether it be income, recreational opportunities, uh, something to pass on to family, or any other number of things that you might be interested in terms of ownership of the property itself. And then we really have to think about, well, some people make the argument, well, woodlands have been here forever. Why do we even need to manage them? And I think that's a valid question, but we've really got some pretty good answers for that. So one of the things is that natural processes have been disrupted by past and present activities. And so a good example is we don't have any real apex predators controlling deer populations other than us. And so that's one of the issues that we deal with, and we're going to talk about that briefly. We have introduced a variety of plants, diseases, insects that originally weren't here in North America that have caused a lot of problems. And so the thought that we can kind of step back and let nature run its course, I think, is in error in most cases because we really don't have natural systems operating anymore. So we've been impacting these systems. And in fact, folks starting with the Native Americans have been managing these systems for better than 10,000 years. So we have been a part of that system for a long time. The other thing we can do with management is we can actually enhance productivity and health. And so through well-directed timber management practices, and we will talk about some of those, we can actually have some benefits to the forest. And that helps us actually achieve some of the benefits and products that we're interested in encouraging on our properties. And the other thing it can do is help us maintain a diversity of ages, types, and structures of forest across the landscape. And that is actually important to maintain the diversity of life that we have here in the state. And so everything from plant species to the wildlife species that use and depend on those. And if we have all old forest, we start losing young forest species. If we have all young forest, we start losing old forest species. And so that diversity of forest ages and structures on the landscape is really important. And that's something we can help manage for. And the whole idea behind this is because we have had a pretty rough past history of land management here in Indiana, looking at restoration, conservation, and then cultivation to achieve those objectives. And this really gives testament to some of the rough history we've had for our woodlands. So, unmanaged grazing, and that can be a variety of livestock, and that's historically been pretty hard on woodlands in terms of damage to trees, elimination of regeneration, compaction of soils. And so there actually is a place for some managed grazing sometimes in woodland management, but it's very carefully managed and monitored. If we're doing unmanaged grazing and not watching the impacts on the trees, we're going to have negative impacts. High grade harvesting. And so this is essentially a practice where we take the best trees and leave the rest. It's purely economically driven to get maximum return for the effort and number of trees taken. The problem is that it gradually degrades both the genetics and value of forests over time. And so if you do a high grade harvesting, 2 or 3 rotations on your property, you finally get to the place where you don't have much marketable timber anymore because all the good stuff has been taken. And there's also not seed source available for regenerating new trees. We can also deal with high numbers of grapevines. Grapevines respond to disturbance and sunlight. They're a native species, but they oftentimes can be super competitive with trees because they grow so fast and cover the tops of trees and shade them out and can do a lot of physical damage as well. And then just overcrowding. And so Mother Nature will thin the forests and plantations, but she does it on her schedule and she takes the trees she wants. we can actually enhance health and growth and also have some selection in terms of what trees we're going to favor if we do management like thinnings and selective harvestings to thin forest stands. And that gives us some flexibility to maintain forest health and favor the trees we'd like to see continue to grow. And all of this really kind of hinges around the idea that we're managing space and light in the forest environment. And so that's what trees are responding to: space to grow and light to meet their needs for photosynthesis to produce the food that they need to survive. And so we do this through a variety of techniques. Number one, if we've got invasive species on the property, that's really oftentimes kind of job one because they are not providing us much of any benefits. They're primarily just competing with the trees that we want to grow. And so controlling invasive undesirable plants is really step one in many cases. And then we have situations where thinning trees is going to provide benefits. And this picture really demonstrates that. This is two tulip trees right next to each other in a tree planting I actually wrote the plan for in the earlier mid 90s. And I had a chance to visit that about 4 years ago and took this photo. And there would be huge benefits to thinning one of those tulip trees out because if you look, they've each only got about a half a crown. And if we take one of those out, we create that light gap that allows that other one to expand its crown, grow, and be a healthy tree. Currently, both of those trees are under stress. And there's a potential, if we have a drought or something like that, both of those trees could die. So killing one tree actually provides an opportunity to favor another. And we can do that same kind of thinning and selection to favor individual trees with harvesting in our woodlands as well. The advantage of harvesting, of course, is we're selling into the market wood products where we're thinning. We're taking trees that can't be sold. They're too small or not high enough value or don't have a marketplace. We pay for that in terms of time and labor and expense. We actually get paid to do thinning when we do harvesting. And then we oftentimes are looking at creating openings that'll provide sunlight to regenerate those trees that need that to grow. And so we've got tulip tree here, but what we'll find is there's no tulip tree regenerating in the shade of those trees because it needs full sunlight to grow. Black walnut is very similar to that. So without creating some of those openings in the forest environment, we start losing some of the light-loving tree species that oftentimes are some of the most valuable for timber and also really beneficial for wildlife. And we have mentioned invasive species, and this is one of the big problems that we see. This is Asian bush honeysuckle. It's highly shade tolerant. It's spread by birds eating seed and scattering around the landscape. It's got a longer growing season than any of our natives to speak of. And ultimately, it kind of creates an ecological dead end in a lot of forests because it shades out any regeneration. And so these overstory trees, if they're taken down in a harvest, if they're taken down in a storm, if they die naturally through time, there's not much space to regenerate anything underneath that. And so dealing with invasive species is a really important issue. And so Asian bush honeysuckle, burning bush. And so winged burning bush, common landscape plant that's escaping into our forest environments. Autumn olive, oftentimes planted as a wildlife favoring species, but it's a nitrogen fixer and can kind of outgrow a lot of our native species. And then Japanese honeysuckle, related to Asian bush honeysuckle, but this is a vine, a little more common in southern Indiana, but I'm seeing it in northern Indiana as well. And all of these can really create huge problems in our forest environment, outcompeting our natives. And one that's probably moved on the landscape faster than any I've seen personally is Callery pear, also called Bradford pear. That's one of the varieties. But this one, because of some recent new introductions over the past 10 to 15 years of other varieties, it went from an infertile to a fertile plant. Birds are scattering the seed and it's popping up everywhere. And you'll see those white flowers in the spring pretty much blooming almost before anything else does. And it's a sign that we've got an invasive species invading our landscape really aggressively. So one of the principles that we look at from ecology that helps us guides us on decisions for management is what we call forest succession. And this is the regular and predictable movement of species through time on a piece of land that maybe it has been abandoned from agriculture or some other significant disturbance. And so we get this progression of plants based on how big they get, how tall they are, and also how much shade tolerance they've got. And so we move from grasses and herbaceous plants to shrubs, and shrubs have the advantage because they can get bigger and they're perennial. And then trees have the advantage because they can get bigger than shrubs. And then gradually, anything that can regenerate in its own shade will ultimately have the biggest advantage in the absence of any other disturbance. And so, what we're seeing in our woodlands now is oftentimes a movement toward shade tolerant trees like sugar maple, beech, and basswood at the expense of less shade tolerant trees like the oaks, hickories, walnut, tulip tree, and black cherry. And so we're going to see without some kind of disturbance like harvesting, fire, windstorms, or whatever that create openings, this gradual movement toward the shade tolerant species. And that's a natural process. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. We just don't want to see it happen across the whole landscape. And so that's where management really steps in to help us maintain that diversity of species that we've got. And that diversity of species is really critical for wildlife. And so wildlife species oftentimes are tuning in to specific ages and or structures of forests. And so we've got some generalists like the short-tailed shrew that it can pretty much live anywhere and be happy. If it can find bugs to eat, it's good. But we've got specialists like some of the bird species. Grasshopper sparrows want grasslands, really big open areas. Some of the warblers are really looking for large blocks of pretty consistent forest area. And so if we don't have those different ages and structures of forests and habitats, we start losing species. And so our shade intolerant trees are the ones that will typically be the first invaders in like abandoned ag fields or abandoned pastures. And these are things like our state tree, tulip tree, cottonwoods, willows, sweet gum, black cherry, sumac, lots of species that are either windblown seed or seed that's carried by wildlife, and they germinate and grow very aggressively and very quickly. Some of them aren't very long lived, like the cottonwoods and the sweet gum. Some of them are actually pretty long lived, like tulip tree. But they really need full sunlight to grow, and in the absence of sunlight, they're not going to regenerate. We've got those that'll tolerate some shade and actually also tolerate some disturbance. And so when we think about the semi-shade tolerance and disturbance related species, we're really thinking about oaks and hickories. And so oak and hickory in Indiana were strongly associated with the use of fire by Native Americans. And so many of our soils are actually good enough that they can easily grow sugar maple, beech, and basswood. But a lot of those forest areas have been dominated by oak and hickory because past history of burning and also forest harvesting that provided the semi-shade situation, the partial sunlight that favored these species, and also fire favors these because they can resprout from root systems very effectively. And so a fire can run through, kill the tops, but the oak and hickory are able to really aggressively resprout from root systems where it's harder for sugar maple, beech, and basswood to recover from that. So that regular fire pattern that we used to have on the landscape really favored those. We don't have that much anymore, and so we're not seeing as much oak and hickory regeneration as we used to have. And it's a big concern because if you look at our inventory numbers on mature trees, we're still in really good shape on oak and hickory. But if you look at the regeneration, the smaller seedlings, we've got a very small number. And so ultimately, we are not replacing those big trees with regeneration because they're not getting the semi-shade and some of the fire advantages that they used to have. And it produces an open understory forest like this that really favors the growth of oak and hickory. And then we've got the shade tolerance. And so these are sugar maple, beech, basswood, ironwood, eastern hop hornbeam, American hornbeam, species that you'll find in the understory of forests regenerating in the shade of themselves or other trees. And so as long as the forest doesn't get a lot of disturbance, these species have the advantage because they can repopulate themselves in their own shade. But if we've got a windstorm that comes through and creates a big opening, if we've got a fire that comes through and creates more light coming in, we can start seeing regeneration of those shade intolerant species and the species that really do well in disturbance and semi-shade. Now, one of the really pretty straightforward management techniques that landowners can look at using on their properties is what we call crop tree release or crop tree management. And this is where you're identifying trees that are meeting your management objectives, whether they be for wildlife, for recreation, for botanical diversity, for timber value. Uh, it can be any number of objectives or combination of, but you're going to identify trees that match your objectives, and you're going to thin around those trees by killing or felling trees that are competing with that tree's crown. And it's called a crown touching release. And so that essentially the trees that are impacting or touching the crown of the tree you want to grow are the trees you're going to target to either kill through girdling or fell and put on the ground. And then you can utilize them if you want to. And that provides additional growing space for somewhere between 10 and 15 years for those particular crop trees. And so the idea is to think about what canopy trees are actually competing with the tree that I want to grow and essentially manage to eliminate those. Now, one of the things we can look at is how many crop trees per acre we're selecting. And so if you really want to thin down the forest quite a bit, you're going to select a lot of crop trees because you're going to do a lot of thinning. If you want to minimize how much thinning you're doing, you're going to select a pretty low number of crop trees, and that'll limit how many trees you're taking. But that has been shown to be really beneficial in terms of providing good growth advantage and also the ability to continue to stay in that forest area because it's a really nice, big, vigorous tree. And here's an example actually from my own property. I have multiple objectives on my property, but one of them is timber income through time. And so the tree on the right is a black walnut. The three stems on the left were all honey locust. The one with the great big multi-pronged thorns. And so the timber markets aren't very friendly to honey locust because they puncture tires. Even though the wood quality is pretty good, it's just a hard tree to handle because of those great big thorns. It doesn't have a lot of market value. Where black walnut is one of our most valuable trees. And so I'm girdling the honey locust to favor the growth of the black walnut in this particular situation. And for smaller trees, we can actually just cut them down. And one of the things we have to recognize is when we cut a tree or girdle a tree, we've taken care of the top, but we've not taken care of the root systems. And those root systems can sprout and grow very quickly. And so we're oftentimes applying a herbicide either in our girdling cut or in the cut stump to help control that root growth and by killing that root system. Another approach we can do with some of the tree species and some of the brush species, if we don't want to do cutting, is what we call basal bark treatment. And this is where we use a particular herbicide called triclopyr. And it's typically the ester formulation, the oil-based formulation. And we're mixing about 15 to 20% triclopyr in the balance of an oil carrier. And that oil carrier can be basal oil, which you can get from herbicide companies, but also the label typically allows kerosene, diesel fuel, or fuel oil as a carrier as well. And we're going to spray that herbicide oil mix on the bottom 15 to 18 inches of the stem, and it actually soaks into the tree, girdles the tree chemically, and so we don't have to cut it to kill it. And this has actually been a very effective technique to use against tree of heaven, a really bad invasive species that grows very quickly and root sprouts prolifically. If we just cut tree of heaven, even when we apply herbicide, we tend to get gobs of root sprouting, dozens, if not hundreds of root sprouts. But using basal bark treatments, oftentimes we can kind of short circuit that root sprouting process and really effective against tree of heaven, but effective against a variety of other species as well. And then oftentimes for invasive shrubs or resprouts of things that I've cut, we'll use foliar applications of herbicides. And so this might be something where we come in and cut off all the stems the season before, then we come back the next season and we'll do a foliar application of herbicides to kill those sprouts. And the real advantage of that is I've greatly reduced the amount of material I've got to deal with. Pardon me. And so I'm spraying less herbicide, and it's a lot more targeted. Oh, pardon me. And we did talk about girdling, and so this is one of those practices where, with timber stand improvement, we're killing trees to favor the growth of other trees, essentially by providing additional sunlight. And so we're making space available by killing those trees that are competing with the trees we want to grow. We're also looking at cutting grapevines. that may be up in desirable trees because of the damage they can do. Although I will typically leave grapevines near streams and on the edge of my woodlands because they can be pretty good for wildlife. And the hardest part oftentimes is actually doing some thinning in areas where we've got a lot of good desirable trees of good quality, but we've got just too many per acre to effectively keep them growing. And so we're going to do some thinning to make sure that the trees that we select as the most favorable are the ones that are going to continue to grow and have the resources they need. Think about it as thinning out that carrot patch to make sure you can produce some good sized carrots. And then once again, if we've got some openings, we want to go in and uh, cut down or kill trees that maybe are competing in that opening to provide full sunlight. And that really gives us an opportunity to regenerate a really nice wide diversity of trees in those openings with that full sunlight. And so girdling, 2 cuts, sometimes we can skip the herbicide with that, but it's more effective with herbicide or 1 cut and a herbicide application in the cut stem. And if you don't want to use a chainsaw, I actually oftentimes do this technique. I'll have a hatchet with me, and that way I don't have to carry gas and oil. And so I have a hatchet and my squirt gun with a little bit of herbicide in it, and I just do what we call a frill cut that you see on the left-hand side there. It's 45-degree angles into the stem, and then I squirt the herbicide into those cut pockets. If it's a species that's a little more difficult to kill, I sometimes will do a complete hacking out of the bark, the cambium layer right beneath the bark, and a little bit of sapwood, and then do a herbicide application on that also. And then with grapevines, we can either do cut stems, and so cut the stump, cut the grapevine off and squirt the stem with herbicide, or we can do the basal bark on grapevines. And if you've ever cut a grapevine in like April or May, you realize it just runs water like a faucet. And so there's no sense in trying to put herbicide on that. It's going to get washed right off. That's a situation where you'd use the basal bark treatment.
Hey,
One
Lenny,
thing. Oh, go
Lenny,
ahead, Mark.
we have a question in the chat here, so I thought you may not see that since you're presenting, but why wouldn't you just cut the bad trees out so you can open up the canopy sooner over girdling?
Well, girdling actually provides a couple of advantages. And so if you're cutting live trees, they are still full of the water. They've got full canopies, and you're probably going to do more damage. Even if you're really pretty good with a chainsaw, you're going to do more damage dropping live trees than you will if you girdle them. When you girdle a tree, it's going to stand for a few years and gradually decay, lose a lot of that water, lose a lot of the finer branch material, and ultimately it will come down, but it's going to come down. It's going to be much softer and also a lot not nearly as heavy. And so they tend to do a lot less damage. The other advantage of girdling is that we provide additional wildlife habitat. So that standing deadwood is actually a really good habitat elements for a wide variety of wildlife that eat bugs and a variety of other things that will get into that wood and also can create dens in that dead wood. And so that's one of the reasons we talk about girdling. The other thing, it's safer for you. And so dropping live trees is one of the most dangerous things you can do. Girdling, not completely innocuous. I mean, you can get hurt girdling too if you're not careful, but it's a lot less dangerous than dropping live trees. So great question.
Ultimately, that opens up anyway, because once that tree's been girdled, it's not going to have leaves on. So
That's right.
and then the gentleman had a follow-up question too. It said, can the herbicide that you put on stumps and or on the trees translocate through the root system to other trees?
It is possible. Yes. Yes. So we are careful when we're working in areas where we've got the same species. A lot of times I will do the double girdle without herbicide because we can get root grafting. If you're working with different species, it's a lot less of a problem. But one of the materials I would be very careful about using that's been commonly used historically is uh, Tordon, which is picloram 2,4-D. It also Pathway is another formulation of that. It's very effective. It's been used for decades, but it will move in the soil more than many of the other newer herbicides like glyphosate or triclopyr. And tulip tree is incredibly susceptible uh, to Tordon. And so I'm very careful with Tordon because tulip tree is one that can get damaged pretty badly by it. So you do have to be thinking about how much you're applying And whether you're working with a species where you're killing the species that also you want to favor, you may want to avoid the herbicide because we can get root grafting.
I've also noticed when I've used Fordon, sometimes like an area 2 or 3, it blows my mind, an area 2 or 3 feet around that stump the following season, like nothing's growing there. So it definitely has some soil activity.
Yeah,
And whereas glyphosate, you almost, if your water's not clean, it don't work because it's that susceptible that it reacts or deactivates that quickly.
absolutely. But I find glyphosate's very effective at cut, stump, and girdling treatments. It still works pretty good.
It's like a 50% to even full strength
Yeah,
concentration.
yeah, you can use it cut with up to 50% water or straight out of the jug as a concentrate. I typically cut it with about 25 or 30% water and find that works really well.
Good questions. Thank you.
All right, you bet. Yeah, yeah, interrupt me if there's any others we can tackle. So yeah, back on the grapevines, one of the things you want to think about with grapevines is even with herbicide applications, we can get some pretty strong sprouting sometimes. And so it's a good idea to do your grapevine control 2 to 3 years before you're going to do harvesting or thinning. And that actually allows that grapevine an opportunity to die before it gets exposure to sunlight, which can really trigger some pretty strong growth in those. And so we did talk a little bit about herbicides. I think one of the simplest herbicides for many folks to use, easily accessible, and it's got a lot of flexibility in terms of how you use it, is the glyphosate formulations. Uh, Concentrates is 41% active ingredient or more, but it's a good idea now to look at the labels. They're adding some things to some of the what was historically like Roundup or others that's not glyphosate. And so sometimes you get some added chemicals in there that maybe you didn't know about that could have some impacts on things like tulip tree. And so it's always a good idea to look at the label and see what you're actually getting. The nice thing about glyphosate is it's very effective as both a foliar spray during the growing season, but also in cut surface treatment, so cut, stump, and girdling. For foliar, I'm usually using 2 to 4% of the concentrate in water that I've conditioned so it's not hard. So if I'm using my hard Lafayette water, I'm usually putting some spray grade ammonium sulfate into that water before I add my glyphosate to condition it. If you don't, the ions in that hard water will start locking up the glyphosate, and as Mark said, it's just not as effective. Now, some solutions to that, you can collect rainwater. Rainwater typically is softer, and so you typically don't have to condition it. Or if you've got a water conditioner and you're getting soft water, that's also an option. But that's very effective. One of the things, though, is this year we had some drought conditions that I think were more severe in places than what maybe even the forecasting was saying. And if plants aren't actively growing because of drought or things like that, glyphosate's not going to be as effective. And so I didn't do nearly as much foliar spraying this year because I was looking at the condition of the foliage and I really didn't think it was going to be particularly effective because it didn't look like it was growing very actively. It looked pretty wilted and in bad shape. So that plant does need to be actively growing for the foliar. The cut stump, we've got more flexibility. Essentially, if it's not frozen or if it's not shooting water out in the spring, you can apply that glyphosate, and we are using anywhere from 25 to 50% uh, water with the concentrate glyphosate and applying it right after we make the cut. I've mentioned triclopyr. This is a material that we're using more and more in forestry all the time. There's actually three formulations now. An ester, which is the oil base, that's what we use for basal bark treatments. An amine, which is the water based, and we can use that for foliar, but also cut stump and cut surface treatments. And then there's another one, I think it's a choline that's a little safer in terms of the amine actually is pretty caustic and has a higher level warning label on it because of some potential damage it can do to eyes. And so Vastland's a little bit safer alternative if you're looking at essentially a water-based formulation. And so these have a variety of different application potentials, as I'm showing here, but are very effective and do a good job and don't have a lot of movement in the soil like Tordon does. And so Tordon pathway, we've talked about that, picloram and 2,4-D. very effective. I mean, it's a great product in terms of reliability of killing the targets you hit, but it can also kill non-targets. And so if you've got tulip tree in your area, or if you don't want to have soil movement actually impact some things around those trees, it's not recommended. Otherwise, if you don't have those issues to worry about, it's still a viable alternative. One thing I would say about it is that it's oftentimes purchased in these quart applicator bottles, and you're probably using 2 to 4 times more herbicide using that applicator bottle as you really need. So I usually recommend folks label a squirt bottle, transfer the herbicide to the squirt bottle, and you're probably going to be applying about an appropriate amount of material with the squirt bottle as opposed to that pull top applicator. And so the idea is we're really looking to provide through thinning and these management techniques a forest that's in a position to grow well and stay healthy and vigorous and resist stresses, things like droughts or insect attacks. And so trees that are healthy and vigorous, got plenty of space to grow, are in a better shape and a better position to ward off those things. And I know some of the most serious droughts I've seen the most mortality in places where we did not have thinning. The trees were already crowded and stressed, and we had a lot of mortality. Where you compare it to places where there was thinning done or harvesting, trees were healthier and it did not have as much stress and mortality in those locations. So the whole idea is we're providing space and light. As we said, we're going to kill some trees to favor others, and really that's dependent to a great extent on your objectives for the property and what trees your property can grow well. And so the right-hand picture here, once again, back on my property, I've got sugar maple, which is not a bad timber tree, but I've got black walnut, and I've got a lot more sugar maple regenerating on my property than black walnut. So I made the choice. I'm going to favor the black walnut in this situation. If it's something else, I might be favoring the sugar maple based on where it's growing and what my objectives are for that location. But that really helps determine what you're going to favor and what you're going to work against to get the best growth. And the other thing I want you to think about is other objectives you may have. And so if you've got a strong wildlife objective, sometimes trees that might be targets for killing because they're hollow are actually doing you favors. So this is a white oak that's got some cavities in it. That kind of hurts its timber quality, but it really helps its wildlife benefits. And so a tree like that might be one you're going to hang on to if you've got those strong wildlife management objectives because it's providing you benefits where it's at. The other question I get asked often is, kind of how do we approach timber sales? And there's no one right answer, but this approach has been pretty reliable and works pretty well for many landowners. And it has some advantages in that, number one, you're using a professional forester to help you make decisions based on your property of what you want to sell. So the good thing about using a forester is, particularly a consulting forester, is going to be working for you as your agent in that sales process. They know the marketplaces, they know the people in the marketplaces. And so they have a familiarity that you just simply cannot get as a landowner who's not operating in that area. They know the marketplace way better than I do because I'm not in the business of selling timber. So when I had his timber sale a few years ago, I actually had a forester friend of mine market it for me. I certainly could have done that, but it wasn't going to be as effective because I didn't know the players. So this is a really good first step, is to get somebody with that professional knowledge to help you with that sale. The forester is going to mark the trees that should be sold. They're going to measure those and grade those and set up essentially an advertisement that they're going to send out to buyers that they think would be interested. And they'll send it pretty far and wide. But the nice thing is they're also avoiding advertising to people they've had problems with in the past, people who don't pay, people who don't do good work in the woods, things like that. So you get a little bit of that filtering process because you've got somebody that knows the marketplace and who's operating in it. And then we set a bid opening date. And so it's a date, time, and place where the forester is going to take all the bids that have been submitted and open those and see who's the best bidder. And so you've got an opportunity to really, on that competitive process, get if not a fair market value, maybe even a market premium on your timber. And I've seen in these bid sales, the variation from the bottom bid to the top bid can easily be 100%. The top bid can be twice what the bottom bid is. And because the buyers don't know what the other sellers are bidding, If they really want that sale, they recognize they've got to put their best dollars on it. And so this has worked really pretty effectively through time. And then you've always got, typically in this advertisement and process, the opportunity to refuse bids. If you decide you don't want to operate with somebody or you don't want to sell the timber at that point in time, you can decide not to. Now, I will tell you that that's sometimes not a good choice in terms of not selling if you've got several good bids because folks have invested a fair amount of time. So you need to be thinking seriously about whether you want to sell and not using this process just to get a valuation of your timber because that could really poison the pond in terms of being able to sell in the future.
Hey,
But
Lenny,
you, oh, go right ahead, Mark.
yeah, I was just going to say one comment here, and I'm not going to say names, but you're, extension friend of ours that I remember he had a timber sale, had the certain trees marked by a consultant forester, and the difference was, I think it was like $75,000 from the top bid to the bottom bid. And
Yeah.
so that 100%, that's a real thing, and those are real dollars. And I guess one thing I thought I'd throw out here is, and this will see if you let you comment on. Sometimes people might look at, well, those dishonest people, they only, the people that are 75,000 below the top bid, what dishonest people? Well, I think sometimes we got to recognize buyers are indifferent. Some buyers may have a need for more veneer quality versus something else. So, I mean, sometimes it's based on what that buyer's current market is for themselves. Sometimes it may be some dishonesty. I remember one time I did a column that said, "Don't let the unscrupulous timber buyer take advantage of you." And we talked about some of the things we talked about. And boy, did I have some foresters mad at me for putting that. Well, none of us are unscrupulous. Well, any profession, there's always somebody that's not. I don't care who it is, what profession. And so I'm not saying foresters are dishonest. And I just want to kind of make sure when people hear that number, they kind of have that understanding the market plays a lot of that. It's not just sheer dishonesty.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. And so, and I do want to make the difference between the foresters and the loggers. And so the loggers
Yes.
are the folks that are cutting the wood. Now, some of them are foresters, but the foresters are the ones that are kind of making the management decisions about what should be cut. Now, when you've got a consulting forester working for you, that person, number one, they've got a professional association that doesn't allow them to be associated with any timber buying entity or industry. So they have to be independent business people. So working as your agents. Number two, they're trained professionals in forestry. And then one of the things that I think it's important to think about is one of the practices that's pretty common in buying timber from timber buyers is to either send out solicitations or come by your property and give you an at the door offer. And I'm always fascinated by the fact that many people tend to accept that because it can be a substantial amount of money. But you've got to ask yourself the question, would you sell your house if you had not had some kind of valuation or comparison done or comparable uh, uh, setup to see what the market value was? If you would do that, I would question how good of a business person you are. But a lot of people sell their timber that way. They sell to the first person that gives them what they think is a decent offer. And so, uh, yeah, people can do some unscrupulous things, but don't do things that put you at disadvantage. You want to know, at least to some level, what would the market potentially pay for this? Well, you don't get a good picture of that by taking the very first offer. And so that's where this sealed bid process really does provide benefits. And Mark said it, the reason that we get that big wide band oftentimes in bids is folks have different marketplaces and they have different needs for particular types of wood. And so they may go to a sale and this may not look that great to them, but they're going to take a chance. And so they're going to put a bid in. It's not that they're lowballing, it's that that's what they're able to pay based on where they're selling their timber and what their needs are. And that's one of the big things about timber. It's not a commodity standing on the stump when it's sold. It can be made into a bunch of different things. And so, unlike corn, beans, and even lumber, which is priced to the penny, uh, standing logs really it depends on who's there trying to buy it and what kind of product markets they've got. So, it's a spot marketplace that's really determined by the sale at that day. So, good points. But this process really helps put you in a position where Number one, you've got some professional advice. Number two, you've got somebody kind of winnowing out those that maybe you don't want working on your property. You're going to have a contract set up. And number three, you've got an opportunity to get a good fair market price. And so this is also looking at, we've got to realize there's different species of trees going into different marketplaces. So this is July 2019 prices. I do that partly because we're not getting some of our regular market pricing we used to on a regular basis. I also do it so you don't think you're going to be able to go out there and start pricing your timber. These are out of date. Timber prices, once they're reported, are out of date almost immediately because it's a constantly moving market. This is for comparison. And so white oak now and in 2019 both, have had really good marketplaces because it's used for a lot of different things and it's used for some high value products. And so prime logs, logs that are just one step below veneer, just a step below perfect, uh, get good values. That's how many dollars per thousand board feet. And so over $1 a board foot. As we go down in grade, which means we're going up in the number of defects, uh, the value drops because there's less and less high value products you can use that wood for because of the defects, and you're getting less and less clear wood out of each of those logs. And so the pricing reflects that. You can see tulip tree, which is used for a wide variety of things as well, but its pricing starts at a lower level because it's not going into the premium products because it doesn't have as nice looking wood. It's still used for some high quality products like a variety of millwork and furniture core parts and things like that, but it's not the premium values. And so you're starting at a lower starting point. And then beech is primarily going into construction pallets and things like that. And so you really don't get any what we call grade premium because it's just not used for those high quality products. And that's related to wood appearance, but also wood quality in terms of its ability to dry well and things like that. So those really determine by the marketplace and the demand what the value is going to be. Species and quality have a big determining factor. So let me move to deer. And this is kind of a pet topic of mine, and I know it's a controversial one. But I will say that deer populations are higher than it is good for the forest in most places in Indiana. And we have gotten used to a overly high deer population level that does not operate well in terms of regenerating trees, keeping healthy forests. And so I see it as a problem for landowners. So one of my recommendations is to think about what you might do as a landowner to help deal with deer populations, and hunting is one of the options. And so if you can find some good people that you trust to hunt your property, and maybe you're already even renting or leasing hunting rights, one of the things I encourage you to do is to encourage them or even motivate them through benefits or things like that or requirements to kill does. Because if you're just having hunters take bucks, you're not controlling your deer population at all. It's through taking does that we actually control deer populations. And you'll see some benefits from tree regeneration, from diversity of species in the wildflowers, from maybe even less pressure from invasive species because deer favor invasive species because oftentimes they're not eating those and they're eating our natives. And so really dealing with high deer populations is important. And I get some people that kind of doubt that. So I just show this. This is west of campus here at Lafayette, West Lafayette. But this property is a wooded property and it's hunted, but the hunting doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. This is a planting that was put in 2008. This picture was taken mid-season 2010. It was black walnut, black cherry, white oak, red oak. The only difference between the left side and the right side is the left side has a deer fence around it to exclude deer, and the right side doesn't. And so you can see the impact that deer have through their browsing. And this is kind of an extreme example, but this is not particularly unusual to have pretty significant impacts from deer browsing and making it hard to regenerate trees and other native plants. So this is the fenced area 9 years afterwards, after planting. We'd actually already remove the fence. You usually take the fence down 6 to 8 years out. We've got a nice developing forest area here. This is the unfenced area, also 9 years out. We still don't have much happening there. There's a few trees starting to poke their heads above where the deer can get to them, but it's taken that long. And so that's an indication that we've got real problems when you've got too many deer on the landscape. So the good news is we've talked about a variety of things you can do in terms of management. You can actually get help from U.S. Department of Agriculture through their cost sharing and technical assistance programs. And so a variety of the practices we've talked about: plan development, timber stand improvement, invasive species control, planting trees, erosion control practices on your property, even assisting with roads and things like that. Lots and lots of different options may be cost shareable through your Natural Resource Conservation Service. And typically the Soil and Water Conservation District office is oftentimes in the USDA offices as well. I know we've got a government shutdown right now, so I'm not sure what the availability of those are at this point in time. Maybe not very good, but once hopefully that gets resolved, this is certainly an option. You do want to make sure that you check in with them and sign up and get approved before you start your practices. But it's certainly worth it if you're thinking about doing some management on your property to go by the office, let them know what you're planning, see if there might be some assistance available to you. I've used these on my own property for my management. I've been very satisfied with how they work. So it's a nice incentive for you as a taxpayer to get some of that back in terms of assistance with management on your property. Mention some of the other folks that can help you. So the Indiana Division of Forestry have their district foresters. They also have a nursery program which sells seedlings for conservation purposes to Indiana landowners at minimal cost. Really great program. So both of those are things you can explore at that website. We've already mentioned access to the private foresters, both consulting and industry foresters, to assist you with timber sales and other management on your property. And then I work for Purdue Extension. And so our Purdue Forestry and Natural Resources Extension site has loads and loads of videos, publications, webinars that you can use for education and reference. And we're also available to contact if you have questions or concerns and need direction. That's one of the main things I do, is try to hook folks up with those folks that can help them on their properties. And then we've got a good number of invasive species resources here in the state as well that you can tap into. So one of the kind of portals for accessing that is the Indiana Invasive Species Council. And this is run through entomology at Purdue. And they actually provide connections to most of the other invasive species resources in the state. So it's a good starting point. We also have a dedicated invasive species page with the opportunity to report invasive species in your area or on your property, but also to learn about the invasive species that you may be encountering. Everything from aquatic invasives to landscape plants that have escaped to insects. And a really good organization in the state is the State of Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management Group. And they have some really nice resources on their website, including a calendar of control. And so it's set up as essentially a month-by-month calendar with recommendations of control techniques for a separate variety of different species of invasives. And I think that's one of your better resources for invasive species plant control techniques here in Indiana. And then once again, you can access cost sharing for invasive species control through the USDA programs from your USDA NRCS office. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. And if we've got additional questions, this is the time that I'll make available for that. Happy to take those. The QR code here will direct you to our Forestry and Natural Resources Extension webpage, so you can tap into our resources there. So Mark, if there's any other questions or topics that folks are interested in, happy to chime in on those.
Yeah, we do have another one here in the chat. It says, I have an area of walnut trees and have hackberry and some maple competing with them. Should I just girdle all of the cut off there? I don't know.
So if some of the maple and hackberry are on the outside edge, sometimes it's good to have a little bit. I don't know if this is in a woodland setting or if it's in an open field. That would have some impact over how I would recommend you doing it. I think having a windbreak around trees that you're trying to favor is a good thing. The wind is actually can be a stressor for trees, and it'll also carry herbicides and a variety of other things. And so having some trees on the outside edge is good. In the interior, yeah, if you're thinking about timber value, you're going to work against hackberry and maple, and you're going to work for black walnut as long as that black walnut is growing well. Black walnut's picky about where it grows, and so you want to look at those trees and see if they're vigorous, healthy, if they've got good green color during the growing season. If they do, probably you're on a decent site for black walnut. And if you're thinking about timber value, that is the tree to favor.
Will walnut grow in lower quality and wet soils?
Not very well. And so walnut is picky about its sites. Some of the best walnut ground is also really good ag ground. So we don't have as much good walnut sites as we used to. So if you're looking to grow black walnut, you want at least 3 and preferably 4 feet of good, well-drained, high-quality soils. If it's imperfectly drained, meaning you've got saturated soils, ponding soils, soils that have gray and smell, kind of a septic smell, anaerobic, that's not going to grow good walnut. The other end of it, really dry, shallow soils, walnut will start there, but it won't grow at a rate that really produces anything in terms of good timber quality. So walnut really is picky about where it wants to grow. Those wet bottoms, if you've got not good drainage or a lot of flooding during the growing season, probably not a good walnut site.
Can we use the woods that is classified forest for other activities like family picnic area or paintball fun? I don't know if you talked a lot about classified forest. That was one of the notes, things I had pre-questions.
Yeah, let me mention classified forest. I didn't really go into that. That is a program run by the Indiana Division of Forestry, and it offers landowners that have at least 10 acres of forest and/or wildlife habitat land a property tax reduction. And so you get a much reduced assessed valuation for your properties in the program that provides you a big property tax break. In exchange for that, you have a management plan that's prepared by the district forester or another forester and yourself. You have the land gets re-inspected once every 5 to 7 years. You can't graze it. You can't have a usable building on it. You need to follow your management plan. But in exchange for that, you get that property tax break. Yes, in general, as long as you're not violating the conditions of the program themselves, and it doesn't run counter to your management plan, you can certainly do recreation. Paintballing is probably perfectly fine. You could ride horses there. You just couldn't keep the horses there pasturing. And so the uses are actually pretty wide open. But so you can't graze it, can't have usable buildings on it. It does need to be essentially forest and or wildlife habitat. Can't be a big backyard pond with lawn around it. That's not going to qualify.
If you had 8 acres and 2 acres around that was available, I think you could plant trees on 2 acres to make a 10-acre area to qualify. Because we do have, yeah. So that was a question somebody asked me this morning, actually, and I wanted to.
Or you could even plant prairie, or a wildflower patch if you didn't want additional trees. So that would be okay as well.
All right. He just said, thank you for the great program and info. So yes, thank you. I'm glad. Thanks for joining us. A couple other questions that people have either asked me ahead of time, and I had a couple too. This was actually one of mine, because I have a woods that's small woods, but it's had a lot of ash trees in it. And obviously this is a good reason why we don't want a monoculture forest in many cases, because when something happens, a lot of holes. But with the emerald ash borer and knocking out a lot of ash trees, and we do have a lot of holes, management considerations in the woods that, maybe was 20% ash trees.
Yeah, so one of the things you're going to have to watch in that woods is because of all the additional sunlight coming in, you should get regeneration of some desirable native trees and shrubs, but you may also get invaded by invasive species. And so if you either have invasive species on your property, they're going to respond immediately to that additional light, or if your neighbors have invasive species, The birds and the wind and whatever else is going to spread the seed into your place. And with that additional light and growing space, they're going to grow. And so it's a good idea if you've had significant ash mortality, creating gaps in your forest, to take a look at those areas. And job number one is to kill invasives that are coming in. And then you can evaluate what other native species are coming in, and you may want to do some thinning or what we call weeding to favor the growth of those trees you want to grow and work against those that you don't. So a good example would be you got this opening that's been created by ash being killed. You may have tulip tree, black cherry, black walnut, elm, and maybe black locust or honey locust. Well, in general, you probably want to favor uh, things like tulip tree, black cherry, black walnut, and you may not want to favor honey locust, black locust, or maybe even the elm if you're thinking about timber. So those are some things you could do and look at in terms of those openings that are created by emerald ash borer.
Would it be good to try to get some trees from the state tree nursery to fill in some of these areas, or just start throwing some walnuts from existing walnut trees over there? Or
I have absolutely moved walnuts around, and so walnuts that are dropping from trees in the shade don't have any future. So you can collect those and either direct seed them yourself with a shovel, just plant them about as deep as the walnut is thick. That's about how much soil you want on top of it. Or literally throw them in piles out there in the opening. The squirrels will plant quite a few of them for you, as long as there's a good walnut crop. Now, if it's a midland to low walnut crop, they'll eat every walnut. You won't have a chance at getting one through. But if it's a good walnut crop, they'll certainly plant them and they'll leave some behind. They won't need them all. You could also order trees from the state nursery and plant some trees, but you typically need an opening that's about a half acre or so in size to get enough sunlight for seedlings to do well that require full sunlight. And so some of these gaps that were created by ash mortality maybe aren't going to be big enough and have enough sunlight to get those real light demanding trees to pop in. In those situations, you could look at things like sugar maple, pawpaw. Those are some species that'll tolerate the shade.
thought another thing too, and I just being an extension educator, the calls that come in about tree deaths and dying, and I don't know, up here in Elkhart, I feel like we've had, Jim, wouldn't you say like three falls that have just been 3 falls in a row? It's just been excessively dry.
Yeah.
And this summer was, but yeah, we got by. We're actually gonna have halfway decent crops, I think, but it just happened to rain in many places, happened to rain just right amount at the right time. But the trees you can tell are very starved moisture. I think downstate, we're looking at, trees were water stressed with too much water, and then now at the end they're water stressed with not enough water.
Yeah.
So, maybe talk a little bit about tree death, and just for people that are watching that might be just watching for the wildlife side of things, or wanting to thinking
Yeah.
about trees save or not save and things like that. I know you touched on a little bit, but maybe a little deeper.
Yeah. So one of the things is if you haven't done the thinning already, you're too late. You have to have that tree already in good condition to really fight off drought impacts or other stressors. And so this is maybe one of those warning signs that, oh, I missed this opportunity. I need to do that so that the next time around I'm prepared. Now, this time around, to be honest, having some mortality in the forest is not always a bad thing, because most of our forest areas, because they're not managed, are what we call overstocked. We've got more trees per acre than can grow in a vigorous and sustainable fashion. So we're naturally going to have death because it's too crowded. The issue is what trees are dying, and are those the trees that you wanted to grow? And so this is really one of those opportunities to go in, look at what you've got, think about what you really want to grow, and start working against those that you don't. If trees have already died, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, because it may actually provide some release for those trees that it's near. Now, I know people don't want to see that happen in their yards, and I really don't deal with yard trees very much. And I kind of jokingly tell people who asked me about taking care of an individual tree, I said, as foresters, if we have a problem tree in the forest, our solution is we turn it into lumber. And so when we have a tree that's giving us issues, we cut it down or we kill it because we need that extra space for the trees that aren't having a problem. And so that's really how we deal with it in the forest is creating additional space.
Then one thing I was wanted to mention, the Purdue Extension office here, Elkhart County, I know around the state, some soil and water districts and extension offices may have like we have what's called a polar bear, PULLERBEAR. You can Google that, search it or whatever. It's they're sold in Canada. There's other uh, types of those tools, but I should have probably brought in here and could have showed you on everybody on the video. Maybe on a recording, I can stick a picture of it on or something. But I will say that makes the Asian bush honeysuckle just doesn't have very good root systems. Oftentimes, the smaller ones, especially in the spring, and once we get some moisture in the ground, you can just pull them out. And but that tool, I mean, you can pull some good size ones with it. So we do have that available if someone would want to borrow it for the weekend or a couple days or something. And good exercise, good way to get outdoors on a cold day and be doing something in the winter. And
Yeah.
even a lot of places I will ask first, but if you like volunteering and being out, a lot of places would love for you to help them with their invasive management. And I don't think we have a SISMA here in Elkhart County. We're working on it, but it's not actually formed yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, those are
Or
great organizations once they get put together, and they usually offer, what they call weed pulls or invasive roundups every now and then. So it's an opportunity to kind of learn by doing.
Yeah, good weed wrangle thing. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and as Lenny said, the next few weeks here is like all. Seems like we're just now getting leaf collar here, and here it is almost November. But the mid-November this year, with everything being later, I would say those Asian bush honeysuckles are going to be popping. They're going to be the only thing green in the woods. So our time is coming up here. That's going to be a good time to do that with easy identification.
Yeah, it's a good time to scout. I would say this year, definitely one of the tests I do before I spray this late in the season is I will shake the shrub. And if I've got any leaves falling off, I don't spray because I've already got the what we call abscission layers forming that are going to cut that leaf off from the plant, and my spray is probably not going to be effective. If the leaves are still tight, still pretty green, you may be able to still spray pretty effectively.
And so fall is probably a better time to spray because you don't have everything else is dormant and you're not going to, especially if you're using the glyphosate.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. It's a really nice window. It's a narrow window, but it's a really effective one for doing foliar spray and not having a lot of collateral damage.
And if possible, you want what, a 55-degree or better day?
Yeah, yeah, you should have some absolutely some temperatures that are going to keep the plant from going dormant, keep it growing and active. Even if the day you spray maybe isn't quite that warm, if you're going to have a couple following days, you're probably still going to be okay because it's getting integrated into the plant. But yeah, you don't want to be out there when you're going to have a period where it's in the 30s or even in the low 40s consistently because you're probably starting to lose plant activity. That's when you start doing your cut stump or pulling.
Okay, and then one other thing here, let's see, sorry, got some good questions here, I think. The harvestable size. So when I say harvestable size, uh, as we said earlier, seriously, like a yard tree is pretty worthless, okay, because we got low branching and all that. But what is a manageable sized area? Like if someone's got a 5-acre tract of woods, as long as there's not been deer stands and all of it, and you got nails in all the trees, and
Yeah.
what are some options for some smaller suburban woodland owners versus, is a 10-acre tract kind of the minimum to have someone bid timber? Does it need to be bigger? And maybe a little bit on that aspect. And then also, kind of a follow-up, if you want to touch on, is I see a lot of trees harvested at 18 or 20 inches. When you think about a tree putting on an eighth of an inch a year or whatever you want to say, when it's put an eighth of an inch on the 18 inches versus 22 inches, that's a lot of difference. So your compounded interest, if you think of it from an investment. So maybe a little comment on that.
Yeah. Yeah, both good questions. And so it's hard to answer definitively on the size of the woods because it depends on what's in the woods. You could have a 20-acre woods, but if it's primarily honey locust, cottonwood, mulberry, and sycamore, it may not be marketable. I mean, it's just so low value that you kind of hope there's a pallet mill somewhere close to you that you can sell to, and you don't expect to get a whole lot for it because their cost to log is very close to the actual profit margin that you can get out of that kind of wood. So there's not much squeal in the pig there in terms of going to market. If it's a woods that's stocked with a bunch of black walnut, white oak, some nice tulip tree, you've got a much better chance at a 10-acre woods of having a successful harvest. And so it really gets down to what the value of the trees are, as much as maybe even how many there are. It does help to have volume on lower grade material because the logger has a pretty high fixed cost to get on site to get his equipment out there. So if you got a bigger woods, even if it's not the best timber quality, you've got a better chance of marketing. So I can't give you an acre figurage, but I will tell you that once a wood starts getting below 10 acres, it's got to have some really high quality trees in it. And your ability to manage it effectively, sustainably is reduced because the majority of the value is in those high quality trees and you don't want to high grade. So if you're just taking the high quality trees out of that woods, you're not going to regenerate other trees without planting. So you get into some difficult issues. So once again, good idea to talk to a forester about your potential for marketing. In terms of size of trees to market, absolutely mark on high quality, desirable, higher value trees. It is almost always better if it's on a site that will maintain the growth to grow them to larger size. And so I don't like to see those trees harvested at the 18-inch diameter because it's really getting into that market area where it's starting to get really a lot of clean wood on it and it's increasing its unit value by going up in grade. And so you want to take advantage of that period by growing those trees to 22, 24, even 26 inches in diameter at chest height. That will give you much better value and you get the advantage of the increasing volume of wood that tree is putting on as it gets bigger in diameter. So your really high quality, high value trees, you want to grow them out so that they're nice, big, mature trees. Now we can get them too big. Mills today are not set up to deal with a lot of trees that are more than 3 feet in diameter. They really produce problems for them. And so we don't want to grow these big, humongous trees because it can actually start degrading your ability to sell them because folks have difficulty dealing with them. Now, when it comes to lower grade, lower quality trees, sometimes we're cutting those at much smaller diameters because we're trying to thin those trees out. And so that's really kind of a weeding or what we call an improvement harvest. But there are minimum sizes where it really doesn't pay them to pull those trees out of the woods, and much less than a 10-inch top diameter on the log is starting to get pretty questionable in terms of marketability.
So kind of tying some of this together, you said earlier that a lot of times people get a knock on the door, kind of look at your woods, and I always call it flash the cash, and yeah, it sounds like a good deal. I'm going to sell my timber, and it kind of goes along with that whole situation of like, you get that small tree harvested and it shouldn't be and all that. And, it's not that everybody's just working in their own favor, I guess, on some of this stuff. I'm not saying anybody's being dishonest, and for someone watching this later, I'm probably going to get a phone call or something for just saying what I said because I have before and things I've written. But it's just one of those things that do your due diligence, and I think sometimes people really struggle. Just to reiterate, that consulting forester is so valuable because they don't have that vested interest, and they're not going to be the one harvesting it, and so they don't have that vested interest. And just before you do it, it's like your analogy with the house was so good. Most times you're not going to just sell your house. Somebody walks up and says, "I'd like to buy your house." Oh yeah, 200,000 sounds good. Well, shoot, I could have got 300,000 for it. So
That's right.
that's a great analogy. And I guess too, there are some timber companies, again, not naming names, but it's like they want you to be part of their management plan and you can only sell to them. And I think that's something to kind of be maybe a little wary of. I don't know if you got any comments
There,
on that.
there's advantages and disadvantages to that. So it can be nice to have somebody that is actually helping you manage your property that you're working with consistently. You've got to recognize that you're not in necessarily a competitive marketplace, and so you're kind of a price taker in that situation, but maybe that's worth it to you. And so I think that's one of the ways they sell that service is that we're going to try to give you a fair price. And I think, the companies that I know that do that typically are, but they would oftentimes also readily admit that they're not going to be providing that premium price that you might get in a competitive situation. But they're providing some other services kind of in offsetting that. So I won't say that's something to avoid. I just say, be aware of what you're getting versus maybe the opportunities you're not taking advantage of. And if you're still okay with that, perfectly fine.
I think your analogy of selling timber to somebody in the house, I think analogy is kind of similar to this is one's own personal retirement fund. Some people are fine managing their own funds and selecting from what's the company offers or what's out there and enjoy doing that. Where other people are like, oh, I don't want anything to do with that, and so I'll
Yeah,
let somebody else manage. And they're going to charge a fee. They don't do that and say, oh, I just love to manage your money for you for nothing. But so yeah, every once in a while I get a question about that. It's like, I don't want to
yeah,
say anybody's bad on because they work that way, but I just thought it'd be kind of good for people to know that that
absolutely.
is.
There's pluses and minuses to all of those, and the main thing is just to be informed of what you're agreeing to, recognize what you're getting, but also recognize what maybe you're passing up in that process and do an evaluation, see if it's worth it to you. And it never hurts to talk to somebody else. I mean, we do that when we sell a house, we do it when we sell a car, we do it when we get a doctor's report sometimes. So getting a second opinion is not a bad thing.
Sherry Zoo's on our in here, and she put in the chat, and and Jim Hess is here as well. But we have a great tree seedling tree sale in March with the Master Gardeners SWCD. Uh, that's probably not something you're gonna use to buy for a plant 100 acres of trees.
Right.
Probably our tree nursery bare rootstock for that, but they do have a really nice, like if somebody's wanting to just get a few trees or to fill in an area or something like that and have something started a little far along is a good option and it's a very reasonable price. So thought that would be, she wanted to put a plug in for that and I'm glad to do that. So
Yeah, more and more SWCDs are offering those tree sales either fall or spring, and those are good options. And you can get some species you can't get from the state nursery.
and then Jim, you got the people order from the state tree nursery. Do you go help pick up trees for people
We
sometimes?
offer up delivery. We bring them back to our office, so there isn't a charge, minimal charge for pickup, but,
Okay,
yeah,
so the SW, yeah.
you pick them up.
So if you do order trees here in Elkhart County, at least, and you might check, I know I've Hendricks County SWC, I remember used to do this from my past working in that area of the state, but just check with your SWCD and sometimes for like a minimal fee, they will actually pick up trees for you from the state tree nursery and bring them back and you can pick them up from your local SWCD office instead of having to have them shipped, which could be a little rough on the trees and especially sorry, post office, but sometimes things sit a long time lately here.
Well, we work with the state nursery and have a planned pickup, so we can
Yeah.
bring them all back at once and.
So yeah, the SWCD has a planned pickup. If you can't, maybe hear Jim, maybe not here with the owl up here, but the SWCD has a scheduled pickup, and that way they just all get here at the same time. And I think it's probably a little less stress on those trees than good opportunity there. Any other questions? Appreciate everybody being on today. That's on and. Yeah, thank you. I do want to remind everybody, if you would please, and I'll put it here in the chat. Jim Evans at Purdue.edu, and you can call the office here 574-533 0554. And I would love to have comments or things that you're thinking about for forestry. This is kind of an overview today, but if you wanted to have a topic, either if we could do a breakfast thing like this and make it a little more in depth, we could even just do a special workshop or something some evening or even during the day or whatever works good. Love to have a few more forestry opportunities. And I don't really have a good database of people wanting forestry information. I kind of sent this out to master gardeners and our ag list yesterday. So I would love to get a little better tree or forestry mailing list and to target some programs there and also just meet some needs there as we have it. And I really appreciate, Lenny, you being on today. So I don't see any other questions, and I thank you much. And I guess we'll let everybody go.
Thank you all.
Thank you.